Dave Antoine, PACTV Government Access Coordinator, and I'll be co-hosting today's episode of Pembroke Today. And sitting with me is Pembroke Town Administrator Ed Thorne. Ed, thank you for joining us.
Dave, always a pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Oh, and today we're here to talk about special town meeting.
Right, that's scheduled for Tuesday night at the Pembroke High School on October 22nd, or 27th, I'll be all right.
Okay, and it's 7 or 7:30?
7, we're trying to start them a half hour earlier now.
Fantastic, okay. So what can you tell us about it? Is it going to be a very dynamic town meeting, as they always are?
Well, I don't know how dynamic it's going to be. This is, it's probably a housekeeping town meeting that we almost always have in the fall. Mm-hmm. Basically what it does is we set aside articles for capital improvements for all the various town departments, and a lot of times we use it to balance the previous year's budget because we may carry over a snow and ice deficit from the winter. And of course, as we all know, last winter was atrocious. And so we have a deficit of about $1 million. So we're going to have to appropriate $1 million to the FY15 budget to balance it.
I'm convinced my back is still hurting from all the shoveling
Well,
this
absolutely.
past winter. All right, so I guess we'll just get right into it. I mean, that brings us up to Article 1, and it's about voting to authorize money to be expended for capital projects or equipment in accordance with the capital budget schedule. What can you tell me about it?
Well, we usually get requests from the various departments, including the school department, for capital improvements that were not included in their original FY16 budgets when they did them in the spring. So what we do is we set aside Article 1 for the various projects that we have listed there. And of course, we have different funding sources for those various projects.
Right. For one, under the town administrator, you had a town floor cover replacement of Phase 2 and then the septic system repair?
Yeah, what happened in Town Hall, we were able to redo all the carpeting on the second floor last year, and so we appropriated enough money to do the first floor. This is carpeting that was laid about 15 years ago when we redid Town Hall. The second item that I've got is a septic system, a new septic system for the Town Landing beach area.
Yeah.
It kind of failed on us this past summer, and so we're taking strides to ensure that won't happen again.
Well, that's always a beautiful part about town meeting. It's also preparing to be proactive.
Oh, absolutely.
Which you definitely need, especially with money. And then there are regulation signs at town beaches.
We've decided that we really want to inform the public about what they can and can't do on the beaches because we incorporated a couple of new beaches, Stetson Pond and Furnace, this year, and we didn't have any signage for those, and we want to make sure that people understand what the rules are when they go to the 4 ponds that we actually have lifeguards at.
Well, of course, and jumping. That brings us over to the police department, the fire department. Clearly, they definitely have needs.
Oh, there's always, there's always equipment needs, whether it's vehicles or improvements to their various buildings.
Yeah.
And that's usually almost an annual occurrence.
And then the fire department has, they need to purchase a new ambulance.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that'll come out of their, what is known as the ambulance fund. They collect revenue from people that they transport to hospitals every year. And they get a share of that money, and they put it in a revolving account, and they can spend money for paramedic pay, for any capital improvements, like a new ambulance.
Okay, and I was blown away by the fire chief interviews. It shows you the sense of community in Pembroke, which is a really great thing. Congratulations on the new hire.
Oh, we're very pleased that Mike's going to do a great job for us.
Good man. And then there's something like, DPW, they're always going to have needs.
Correct.
That's such a broad and diverse department. What can you tell me about their needs?
Well, they have a lot of vehicles.
Yeah.
We have about over 100 vehicles that are on our insurance coverage townwide, and over half of them are in the DPW. Whether they're tractors or 18-wheelers or dump trucks or snow plows, 4x4 pickups, whatever. So they have a large amount of vehicles, and we try to keep them on a nice schedule to be replaced so that we don't really have the guys driving an unsafe vehicle or something that is really going to nickel and dime us when it comes to maintenance.
And that also falls under the funding category of, I believe, like free cash and water surplus. Can you tell me what those are?
Well, free cash is kind of like a strange term for surplus revenue. In other words, at the end of the fiscal year, and our fiscal year ends on June 30th, hopefully there's money left over, whether we collect more in revenues than we anticipated, or that we spent less during the year than we had budgeted for. And that's usually the case in both categories. And for a $55 million budget that we have, including the schools, we normally have between $1 million and $1.5 million left over. And that's the Department of Revenue calls that free cash.
Okay.
And so when it's certified by the Department of Revenue, then you can use that for anything.
Right.
And a lot of times we use it to balance the budget from the previous year if we have a snow and ice deficit like we do.
Yeah. And
to pay for capital improvements like we do in the fall. And usually we try to save some of that money that we had left over.
Right.
And last year we were able to save $500,000 that we've been able to carry. Yeah, it was a great deal for us. We really appreciated the school department and all the various town departments for not really having to use that kind of money. So that's why we had that inordinate free cash that we had starting this year.
And that also brings us, speaking of the school department, resurfacing the tennis courts and facilities and exterior security cameras for elementary and middle schools. It's a very interesting.
Well, we've been dealing with security issues in the schools now for several years, and we try to address any kind of situation that comes up, and this will be the latest that that we're trying to rectify at the various school would be these security cameras.
Well, of course, and also jumping over to the Council on Aging. You have a new Council on Aging director who's a wonderful woman, Anna, and there are building repairs and chair replacement that's going to be.
Well, yeah, when Anna came aboard in the spring, she did a inventory of the building, internally and externally, along with our building custodian, and so we went through a shopping list of things that we want to do to the building because it's been a senior center now for about 18 years. It was a former library, and the senior center used to be in the old community center. And then when the new library was built around 18 years ago, then the senior center activities moved to what was known as the old library. And they've been in there for about close to 18 years. And, little wear and tear in the building, and some things just start to fail. So
and that building's getting a lot of use over the past
absolutely, and
decade.
we're thinking it's going to even get more use with the new director.
Oh, it's going to look great. And then the library, of course, has exterior building maintenance, and that's a beautiful building, by the way.
Right.
And that's also under Article 1. And then I guess jumping ahead, after Article 1, we also have Article 8. And I know that's going to be a particularly interesting one. It's borrowing $385,000 for necessary drainage improvements to the Pembroke High detention basin.
What happened a couple of years ago, we had a serious stormwater runoff problem at the high school.
Right.
And the high school is on a hill, which is the highest point in that immediate area. So even though the town owns well over 100 acres of land, that includes the herring run, we had a kind of like a failure of the detention basin that carries all the drainage from and behind the high school to this drainage basin. And evidently it wasn't constructed properly or it wasn't big enough. And so we had that engineered a year ago, and now this is going to be the price tag for building a larger detention basin to hold all that stormwater, so we won't have it run off into either private property or it would be, water going down into the herring run. And we certainly want to prevent any surface water runoff from getting into the herring run.
We're just imagining the type of construction, the engineering that's going to be involved. It's going to be a very complex thing, but it's going to be amazing.
Well, that's why the price tag's at $385,000. It's
Right.
not just like digging a hole up there.
No. And that also, speaking of drainage, that brings us to Article 9, which is borrowing $200,000 for required drainage improvements related to the Route 14 reconstruction project.
When the Conservation Commission was examining the Route 14 corridor project, there were some issues that they felt weren't addressed by the engineers that designed the road several years ago and took it to Mass DOT for their approval. And these were drainage issues that were over and beyond what were on the original engineering plan. So this summer, the Conservation Commission had a series of hearings with Mass DOT and with the engineers for the town. And they said, these are projects that we think need to be done. And Mass DOT said, well, we're not paying for them because there weren't any original plans. So there were 3 drainage projects that will occur. One is near the Herring Run on Barker Street. Another will be a drainage system that'll be on Matakeesia Street, almost directly across from Sampson Lumber. And the third one will be at Furnace Lane on Matakeesia Street, and that would be the larger of the 3 projects. I think the price tag for that's approximately $120,000, and that's to prevent surface water and runoff from the road into Furnace Pond.
Right.
And one of the pond studies that we did several years ago showed that some of the contaminants in our ponds were coming from roads, because you got salt and sand and what have you that run off the roads and into our ponds, and it was causing some phosphorus growth that we had. And so one of the things we did about 10 years ago was to create about 30 to 40 catch basins in and around the ponds that would prevent that stuff from getting into the ponds.
Right.
And this is another preventive measure that we've got lined up for the Route 14 corridor project, because the Route 14 corridor project is going to widen the road. It's going to have sidewalks and granite curbing on both sides. So it's going to increase the amount of surface that water can run off of, as opposed to right now where the road is narrower and it's bounded by grass and dirt, which
Right.
would absorb the material coming off the road.
Which, that'll obviously affect the environment. And Pembroke is so well defined by all the ponds that you guys have.
Oh, absolutely. And anytime we have any article or any kind of situation that would increase the quality of the ponds in town, it's always been a no-brainer for the people to vote for it.
That's fantastic. And that would also bring us over to Article 10, which is replacing the existing language for SE-22 alternate building inspector with SE-22 alternate inspector building department.
What we found out over the years is that even though we have building inspectors that handle plumbing, gas, electrical, and building, there are occasions when we need some backup. And we've never had an official, we've never had titles for anybody to back up the plumbing and gas inspector or the electrical inspector. So this would create a kind of like a catch-all position, so that if we needed to have somebody back up the plumbing or a gas inspector or the electrical inspector, we had the ability to do that. Right now, we did in the past.
Oh, okay. It's just changing some small things, basically.
Right.
Okay. And that would also bring us to Article 12, which is also related to the proposed Furnace Pond dredging project, which I'd imagine is a big thing.
This is going to be probably one of the biggest things that the town has to tackle in the next several years. We did a dredging study several years ago on the heels of the study that we had for Furnace Pond. The problem with Furnace Pond is that it's sort of like a stagnant pond. Oldham Pond feeds into it, but then there are 2 dam structures at the eastern end of Furnace Pond that kind of hold the water in. And what's happened over the years is that the pond actually has started to fill up with sediment. So if indeed it's from the top of the water to the bottom of the pond is 10 feet, what we're finding out now is that over half of it is sediment, is muck, and the other half is water. And what this sediment's doing, or the muck as we call it, it's starting to choke off vegetation in the ponds. And when it chokes off vegetation in the ponds, it chokes off marine life as well. And it's going to have an adverse effect on the herring, because the herring go through Furnace to spawn in Oldham Pond. So we looked at the study originally about 7 years ago, and the price of dredging the pond and disposing of the muck, as we call it, was astronomical. It was in the $20 million range. And 3/4 of it was transporting the muck out of there, because either we would truck it out of there or we'd try to pipe it out of there. Now, we were fortunate about a year ago to find out that the 10-acre bog property across the street, across Matakeesit Street from Furnace Pond, was available for sale. And that is going to be the area where we could actually pipe the stuff over there, let it dry out, and then hopefully sell it, because it's a very valuable commodity. It's very fertile, it's not toxic, and so, you know, a lot of places are going to want this stuff. So we found out when the property was available, and we purchased it last spring, that now we would be able to cut our costs astronomically from pumping it out of Furnace Pond, and instead of pumping it long distances to town property that we own, you know, probably maybe a quarter or half a mile away, it's right across the street. So this is really going to help us out in fixing the future of Furnace Pond. And this article will pay for engineering and for permitting, because we're going to need permits from EPA, DEP, the Corps of Engineers, and probably some assistance from the Division of Marine Fisheries, because they're interested in the quality of the migration of herring to and from Oldham Pond.
Well, like you said, the quality of the ponds in Pembroke is very key to the community. And I'm curious too, as far as the muck becoming a commodity, like what does it become? Is it like a?
It's about 95% water.
Oh.
And so that's the problem, because it's just water.
Oh.
And so what we're planning on doing is that we pipe it underneath Matakeesit Street, and we just pipe it onto the 10-acre bog site, and hopefully, you know, it'll drain, and then, you know, and then we're going to have mechanisms to allow the water to go back into Furnace Pond, only in a cleaner version.
Oh, that's interesting.
And then what's left is this sediment, and hopefully, you know, it'll dry out, and when we get to a sufficient amount of you know, tonnage that we can ship out, then we'll do that.
It becomes a nice organic process that's
Well,
beneficial.
Yeah, that's the game plan.
That's good. And then jumping ahead, we have Article 14, which is about amending zoning bylaws for the town to add assisted living residents to Section 4.
Yeah, there's some property up on 139, also known as Church Street.
Yeah.
Right now, it's a horse farm, and they are in a 61A or 61B tax status, which means they get a break from the town to have agricultural, excuse me, agricultural use or horse farms, whatever. And so when they wanted to sell the property, they had to come before the town, and the town had to make a decision as to whether or not we wanted to buy the property or not. Well, I don't think we want to be in the horse farm business, so the Board of Selectmen voted not to buy the property, and to exercise their right of first refusal. So that being said, now that clears the way for the property to be sold, and the prospective buyer wants to put an assisted living facility in on the property, which we think would be a real asset to the community. So in order to do that, our present zoning laws don't allow for that particular use in that zone. Mm-hmm. So what we're going to do, there are 2 articles that deal with this entire project. The first one will be to put assisted living as a permitted use in Industrial A and Industrial B. And there were a couple of smaller changes that the planning board wanted to make. And then the second article actually changes the zoning map so that we would extend Industrial B down Church Street westward to include this property that we've got. And we would rezone it from Business B to Industrial B to allow the assisted living facility to go in there. So both Article 14 and 15 are related, dealing with that particular facility.
It fascinates me through, articles in the town meeting, the various channels and laws, everything is sort of, they all mesh together and they're stacked on top of each other, but each one is dependent on the other.
Right. In this case, we will tell the public that, we need to vote on Article 14 first and then Article 15. So
Right.
we're going to take them back to back.
And that also brought up an interesting question. I was curious, what actually qualifies as an industrial district?
Well, it just depends on the kind of uses that you want to have in there.
Mm-hmm.
You can have, for instance, auto body shop or a large facility such as assisted living in a residential area.
Right.
And zoning has been around for about 130 years. It was, I think, the first Supreme Court decisions were around 1900 when zoning was upheld. And in the vast majority of communities in the United States have some sort of zoning so that people can coexist with businesses and with industries in a community. The days of everybody living on farms miles from civilization are over with.
Yeah.
And so when you do that, then you have to be cognizant of a quality of life in a community. And so that's why you have zones for particular uses, in one part of town that are comparable with other uses.
Yeah.
And then making sure that there's some kind of buffer situation between those zones and a residential area. Mm-hmm. And then there's all kinds of residential areas, some that would allow apartment complexes or multifamilies like condos or what have you. And then other residential areas would be strictly single family homes.
Okay, it's all for the benefit of the community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It just gives some order to the community. There are some cities in the United States that don't have any zoning, and of course the prime example is Houston, Texas, where it's just like the Wild West down there, where you can build anything next to anything. So
huge state,
a big time, but it's and Houston's a large city.
Yeah.
So it's they refuse to have any zoning there. So, but they probably got to be the only major city in the United States that has it.
Of course. The beautiful thing about any town meeting is that it's ultimately an open process. Everyone can speak on the articles, and they have their concerns or their issues. They can get it out there on the open floor.
Yeah, we try to get the public informed as soon as possible. The town meeting's not until October 27th.
Yeah.
But the selectmen are going to vote on recommendations on the articles this coming Monday, and then officially sign the warrant on September the 8th, so that it'll be almost a month and a half that the public will have to view the warrant, and of course we'll have it on the website and other media. So we try to get everybody informed as soon as they can.
Well, we're running out of time, so that brings us to our last article, which I believe is the last article of town meeting, which is Article 16. And there are various recommendations, and it was appropriating money for a community preservation committee for fiscal year 2016. And it was to see if the town will vote to implement recommendations for appropriating such money. And the first one was appropriating $40,000 from annual revenues to the First Church trustees for phase 1 of the restoration of pillars, trim, windows, and shutters.
What the Community Preservation Committee has done over the last several years is that if somebody has a decent application, and even if it's on private property, but in a historic district,
yeah,
the CPC is very amenable to that. And in this case, they're proposing that the town meeting vote to allow the First Church to do some renovations. Because it's the first church ever in Pembroke, and in a historic district, they think it's money's that appropriate.
It's very integral. And then you have the Cobb Library for phase 1 of the replacement of exterior shingles and items like that.
Similar situation where you have a building that is historic in nature, and CPC feels fit to use that money appropriately.
Okay, and then that also brings us over to the Recreation Commission. The first one was $7,561 for the safety guardrail and gate at J.J. Shepherd Field.
All of there's like 5 of those that are on that article that all deal with recreational improvements, whether it's at Magoon Field or Mattakesett Street. Right. So, we feel it's a good choice of monies to improve the recreational facilities for our residents.
Oh, of course, every town needs a recreational department. And then that also brings us to one about removing an existing backstop and installing a new one and a canopy at the girls' softball field at Mattakeesit Street.
Yeah, like I said, these are all recreational improvements to both town-owned properties, Magoon and Mattakeesit Street.
Right, and the softball field is obviously a great thing for the community. And then that also brings us to Article F, which is installing a side fence at Magoon Park. Was there a side fence there before, or is this a new item?
Well, if there was one, it's not in good shape.
Okay, yeah.
So we replaced the one along Route 53 a couple of years ago, and aesthetically it just looks better when the fence is in good shape and not overgrown with weeds and bent and,
Yeah,
you know.
just new maintenance and
Absolutely.
things like that. Well, thank you, Ed, for coming to visit with us today.
My pleasure.
And what is the date again for a special town meeting?
It's Tuesday evening, October 27th at the Pembroke High School at 7 o'clock.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you. And thank you for watching this episode of Pembroke Today. And you heard Ed. Be there at Pembroke Town Meeting. Thank you.
Don't let E. coli mosh with your food. An estimated 3,000 Americans die from a foodborne illness each year. You can't see these microbes, but they might be there. So always separate raw meat from vegetables. Keep your family safe at foodsafety.gov.